North Korea is the most unusual country on the planet. Separated from the rest of the world by an iron curtain, it is the subject of constant controversy. Some people consider the DPRK's isolation approach to be excellent and set it as an example, while others dig up articles about starving people. Tyrant. We don't claim that by the end of the video you will come to a definite answer. Our business is history. And now you're about to learn how North Korea was formed, how it brought the world to the brink of World War III 3 times, and caused China and the US to go to. And it's even more fun with your comment about whether you would like to visit North Korea, because it's an unusual country. Before we go back in time, you should know one simple fact that will tell you more about North Korea than hours of videos. In 2014, Brazil hosted the World Cup. The DPRK failed to qualify, and their neighbors from South Korea decided to play a prank. The capitalist Southerners edited a humorous video where a slice of World Cup footage was superimposed over the DPRK's match, giving the impression that North Korea had won the World Cup. And what did you think? North Korea's only TV station quietly published the clip, calling it completely true. Thus, all of North Korea still believes that their soccer team is the world champion. And all because there is no internet but that's the details. Now we're going to dive into history. It is about 1300 BC, and a stay formation appears on the Korean peninsula. It is called Ancient Joseon, and occupies the entire space without division. Scientists still question the exact date. Some say that the prototype of Korea was formed only in 300 BC, and some go further, saying that Joseon. It is funny that its capital is considered to be ancient Pyongyang, not Seoul, which was not even smelled at that time. But this is not so important. In addition to the peninsula, even a part of southern China was under its control. Actually, historically, it was with China that Koreans had relations of varying. It was the Chinese Han Dynasty that destroyed and conquered the prototype of independent Korea in 108 BC. For 1,000 years, the peninsula was under unclear rule. There were 3 kings. It wasn't until 935 that the peninsula became united again. It was then that Serim appeared, which became the prototype of Korea. For several centuries, the guys developed culture and science. It was eventually dodged, and in 1392, the real Korea was born. At first it was called Joseon, and later the Korean pirates of this country had been raiding Korea since ancient times. But by the end of the 19th century, the claims began to take shape into something more. And in 1910, that's not to say it was all bad. Under the Japanese, life expectancy doubled. Schools began to open. And it's not wrong to say that modern Korean culture is of Japanese heritage. Even the first university in Seoul was opened by the Japanese Governor General Saito Makami. He also launched newspapers and banned corporal punishment. True, besides plazas, there were also menaces. They consisted in assimilation, purges, and other joys of life. But as everyone knows, at the end of World War II, Japan fell, and with it, Korea became free again. This is where the fun part comes. After Korea was freed from the Japanese, the country was occupied by the armies of the USSR and the USA, which had just defeated Japan. And needless to say, a fat independent. Initially, as a temporary measure, the USSR troops occupied the north, and the US troops occupied the south. The countries were divided along the 38th parallel, but it was only convenient. The two countries did not think of dividing Korea. They tried to create a government and, of course, failed, because the Soviets were interested in communism, and the US in capitalism. As a result, on August 15, 1948, the Republic of Korea with Seoul as its capital was proclaimed on the entire territory, controlled by the Americans. 3 weeks later, for a second, this happened only 70 years ago. We hope that now you realize that there was no historical implication to the division of Korea. a single and identical people, lived on the peninsula for thousands of years. And the big guys, in this R, simply divided it in order to satisfy their imperial ambitions. Even the borders were taken from the ceiling, spitting and drawing lines where there was a border of troop basing. Leave a comment if you want to see a video about South Korea. But for now, we're interested in the North. And it's been fun. The ruler of the newly created DPRK was Red Army Captain Kim Il-sung. As befits any totalitarian country, all hell immediately broke loose in North Korea. The cult of personality around Kim Il-sung dealt everything. He had unlimited power, of course, thanks to the full support of the USSR and the gaining power of Communist China. South Korea was immediately declared occupiers by the commercialists, and they did the same in return, and with a simple stroke of a pen on a piece of paper. The USA and the USSR created one of the most unstable regions in the world. On both sides, there were calls for war and unification of Korea, and each side thought they were right. In 1949 alone, South Korea made 2,617 armed incursions, violated the air border 71 times, and violated the people's border 42 times. Its neighbors were doing true. The example of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was fresh, so the USSR was afraid. On the other hand, China hinted that it would be happy to help the DPRK in the confrontation. So the situation was ambiguous, and it became critical when the USSR tested the atomic bomb and became the second nuclear power on the planet. In March 1950, Kim Il-sung again came to bow to Stalin, and the latter finally gave the go-ahead for war. Just by chance, the DPRK army was packed to the brim with T-34 tanks, Soviet aviation and consultants, and 500,000. Initially, the DPRK took Seoul, and almost the entire peninsula, in the best traditions quite suddenly. On June 15, 1950, 175,000 people crossed the border of South Korea, and with the support of tanks and aircraft lightning, the USA did not believe in the war and was in shock. And the half-smaller South Korean army did not have tanks at all and was defeated. 90% of its territory was conquered by the DPRK, and it seemed that there was no. It was only on September 15th that reinforcements arrived. The troops of Britain, the United States, and the Allies staged a real doomsday. Within a month, they reached Pyongyang, taking it back. The arrival of 500,000 alleged volunteers from China swung the pendulum again. Taking advantage of the surprise effect, Beijing's troops, with the help of the USSR, crushed the Americans and took Seoul back again. This would have been ridiculous if the war had not been accompanied by many thousands of casualties on both sides. In the end, by February 1951, the war had reached a stalemate. In fact, both sides were on the same position. But despite this and a couple more years of clashes, negotiations at the UN continued. The decisive moment came with Stalin's death in 1953. After his death, the USSR quickly declared its desire to end the war. However, it should be understood that at that time, South Korea was no less, if not more belligerent than North Korea, what is only the Emily Gabo's establishment. Yes, according to various estimates, were supporters executed from 60,000 to 1 million people accused. For years afterward, the US government would deny this genocide. But the fact remains, at the 1953 peace talks, but in the end, the armistice was still reached, and each country went their separate ways. South Korea gave birth to SAMPS. After falling out with the USSR and China, Kim Il-sung came up with an official ideology. It's called Juche, and its essence is simple. The North Korean people must achieve everything on their own, without outside help. Simply put, it is isolationism, under which the DPRK, to this day, remains separated from the rest of the world. Whether this is good or bad is not for us to decide, but even now, Human rights activists estimate that 1/3 of the DPRK's population is starving. The worst case has gone down in history under the name of the Difficult Campaign. In 4 years, from 1995 to 1999, it claimed from 10,000 to 3 million lives, according to various estimates. However, the government claims that the West and its sanctions, which, as you know, are imposed all the time, are to blame, mainly because of militarism and loudmouths of the DPRK rulers. Since the 70s, the guys have been working on nuclear weapons, and in 2005, Kim Jong-il said that North Korea has them. And in 2015, his successor, Kim, the US has been trying to nail North Korea for a long time. But time after time, all attempts have failed. In the 90s, Bill Clinton even discussed the possibility of a missile strike on the nuclear reactor at one bit. However, the idea was abandoned because South Korea is nearby, and no one wanted a repeat of the war. After all, this time it could be even more destructive. And in the end, a fragile but order was established. Under it, the US constantly demanded from the DPRK to eliminate its nuclear stockpiles, imposing sanctions. And the DPRK, in turn, according to its mood, prepares for war or declares its liquidation and entry into the world community. The current leader even met with Donald Trump, where they talked about progress in relations. True almost immediately followed the data about new tests, and everything went back to normal. North Korea is in the position of ruler here is hereditary, and the internet can only be accessed after authorization from the party and in strictly designated places. People still don't know what goes on outside the borders of their state, and for all that, they are just as Korean as the guys in South Korea. It's just that 70 years ago, the powers that be decided to make up who is cooler. And as a result, the United Nations is divided to this day. The Korean War alone claimed nearly 4 million lives from all over the planet. Not for nothing, they say that history teaches us nothing. And North Korea is a vivid example of the very history we need to know. See you again, friends!